Are you ready to talk about one of the scariest things in MMORPGs? Things that are even scarier than hearing the words in-game microtransactions. 'Cause today I want to talk about change.
The world heaves with my torment. It's
Hold on, change can take a sec. Dune Awakening is the catalyst for this conversation because they made a pretty big announcement. One that I actually really want to get into. Not just about Dune Awakening and what they're proposing, but how that impacts other games like Star's Reach and how the things that we've learned from stuff like, well, World of Warcraft Cataclysm. The question that's going to be asked in here is basically, can an MMO exist? Can it thrive and function if the MMO itself is not as static and is actually constantly changing? Dune's latest trailer leaves people with that bold declaration that the new MMO from Funcom will offer people infinite exploration through an ever-changing world, a truly living and breathing world. Just take a listen.
The most remote expanses of Arrakis are within your reach. In the deep desert, massive Coriolis storms regularly sweep across the land with monstrous power, changing the entire map every week. As new resources and secrets are revealed, the race to survey the vast new landscape begins anew. Be the first to mark the location of precious resources, and give the map to your allies, or sell it to other players on the exchange. Here, there are no paths to tread, only power to claim. This is infinite exploration. This is Arrakis.
But is this a mistake? Is this going to be too much change for an MMO player? Because you see, when EverQuest was using living and breathing world as their marketing gimmick back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the living and breathing part was you and me. We were the living and breathing world. The world itself was static. Yes, the game did expand, adding new content, raising the level cap, increasing the amount of content available. Something is done over 30 times now since EverQuest launched in 1999. But it wasn't until World of Warcraft came along and dropped a molten dragon on their game that at large scale, we got to see just how players reacted to massive change. Now, honorable mention needs to go to Asheron's Call and other games like that for these world-changing events that have gone down in absolute legend. But for the sake of this video, we're gonna stick to the most well-known and most divisive, Cataclysm. And hey, real quick, before we get super into this video, I just want to say if you really want to help support this channel, I've got a 99-cent way to do it. You see, I actually wrote books. I have a couple books, and one of them is available now for 99 cents. And it's linked down below. It's a story that follows the brutality of war and revolution as a once disgraced politician joins with an uneven rebel leader to push back against a brutal regime. A story of pain, betrayal, love, loss, and political upheaval that shakes the very foundations of all that is known. But now that I did a little pitch, let's get back to the actual video that you're here for. What Dune Awakening appears to be talking about here is remaking a portion of their world, not just through one singular event, but every single week, tying those changes into an actual core function of the game, mapping and world building. However, it's not the entirety of the game that's changing, but more specifically, one specific region known as the Deep Desert. One you'll only be able to access once you've earned an ornithopter to fly around. It's here in this area where skills you can learn in map making can actually bring you fortune, either by finding important resources for your friends or selling those maps on the market. It's an interesting premise, weekly exploration that can lead to tangible benefits and resources for the player. And interestingly enough, this isn't the only game doing this right now, as Raph Koster's new MMO, Star's Reach, also plans to have mapping that players can sell of changing worlds. Cartography and maps aren't exactly new to MMOs, but the ever-changing nature of both of those games, the first through weekly storms and the second through their life sim, adds an interesting wrinkle of change. And it also, in a weird way, it becomes a constant, because the change itself is a constant. You are aware that the change is going to be happening. You know that change is going to be happening. Something that wasn't the case with Cataclysm. Whenever change in an MMO comes up, I don't think for now we're going to be able to escape Cataclysm, because it's World of Warcraft, the largest MMO ever. And it comes up in part because of how dramatically it changed the world of Azeroth. There's a lot to unpack with Cataclysm in general and the mixed reception it had. And it wasn't just about the visual and level range changes to zones that had been around for years. But the changes to zones that had existed for years is, I think, where these kinds of changes in the MMO space are going to be so divergent. And that's what I wanted to really talk about. Cataclysm was an upheaval, a massive change to a pre-existing game where the initial promise of the game was, well, not that. MMOs really don't change that much. They grow and they expand, but they leave old zones largely unchanged. And when they do go back, say like EverQuest revamping the visuals of old zones, like Freeport, or Cataclysm with WoW and flooding canyons, well, people are more often than not are gonna get kind of mad. I often feel like I'm in the minority of players who thought the changes in Cataclysm were amazing. I love what Cataclysm did because it seemed to live up to this idea of a living and breathing world that making everything so static doesn't really do. But I also completely understand a lot of the negativity around it. And there's actually, I think, kind of an underlying reason for that actually ties into a sort of FOMO. With any change comes a fear of missing out. It's a very different kind of FOMO though, from a game expanding and going beyond its previous boundaries, like adding a frozen continent with cool as fuck dragons. Because you see, an expansion like Cataclysm that goes back and changes those old zones essentially divides players from what was and what is, rather than what's old content and what's new content. When you make a change like this, an entire experience disappears. An entirely new generation of players have now missed out. And I get it. A lot of the time, these zones that you have inhabited for hours upon hours, for years, when they get blown up by a freaking angry dragon, it can kind of feel shitty. It can feel bad. Your home was basically destroyed without your consent. Not that you'd ever really consent to your home being destroyed unless you're like it was insurance fraud. Let's move off that topic. Which is why I actually think this approach from Dune might be the one that's actually tolerated a hell of a lot more than a one-time seminal event. And why, in part, just not to bring up the specter of EverQuest Next, but EverQuest Next, which also was focusing on change as a function of the game, was also something that people were interested in. These map changes not only are starting from the beginning, but they're key to an ever-evolving part of the game. This kind of feels like an evolution of one of my least favorite parts of MMOs, weekly and daily quests, into a more lore-friendly, world exploration-friendly version. A less manufactured version that's really only relying on FOMO and instead giving you an experience to have, but resetting that experience each week. It kind of even sounds a little bit like what Crowfall was trying to do. one of the parts that I think is making me set this aside from some other games. Like, for example, if you look at Ashes of Creation, or really even before that, Shadowbane, these were games that really focus on these player cities, and the world itself was always changing. Ashes of Creation is using these node systems, which are all about change and shifting and cities being destroyed and rebuilt and all these kinds of things. But this, I think, is different because it's more about the zone itself changing from a non-player focused event. It is the world itself that is making this happen, which makes it a little bit more interesting to me in that regard, as being something a little bit different than something that was done in, like 2003 with player cities type thing. We'll have to wait to see how it looks in practice, but this is an announcement from the upcoming Dune MMO that I actually find myself really interested in. I want to see how this works. I want to see if it just gets metagamed and monopolized, or if it actually works to create an organic experience for players. I know about as much as you do if that will happen. We just have to kind of wait. Luckily, we don't have to wait that long because it's coming out in May. But thank you so much for watching. My name is Redbeard Flynn. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.